impression of like the Brazil running culture and what the community is like. It seems like everyone like just loves to run and be out in nature so much. Like it's just that, it seems like that's the first most apparent factor. Like that comes first, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. Whereas like in the US, sometimes like is that number 2 or 3 on the list. Like first is like, oh, I'm gonna go race and beat all these people. 2, it's like I'm gonna do it for my sponsorship, and 3, I'm doing it because I love to do it. It's like for Brazil, it's like no, that's number 1. Is like we're doing it because we love it, and everything else is like kind of a cherry on top type of thing. You can tell me what you think about that.
I mean, there's a lot we can dig into here. But I mean, I would say based on what we've already talked about and what I mentioned before we started recording is it's definitely a much younger community here. And we're growing quickly. But what you talked about is definitely here. There is a passion for connecting with nature. And because we don't have, I'm going to put these in air quotes, problems of a lot of money around trail, there's no reason to be involved in the sport of trail running. There's no reason to be involved in anything outdoor in Brazil for money. There's just no drive behind that at the point we are in our growth here. But one thing I talked about with you before is like I would love to hear in your perspective. I gave you an analogy for people in the U.S. to understand. It's kind of like you're talking to Scott Jurek in 2008, and you're telling him, man, the future, or maybe this is a Back to the Future Marty McFly situation of trail running, but it's something that's growing here. We're about in that 2008 stage of where the U.S. Running culture was. But we have amazing tools like Instagram and podcasts that we're just trying to figure out how to use now in our community here. And I'll be honest with my own story. I don't want to go too deep into my own story, but a big reason why I started this podcast and why I'm much more active in the running community is because I want to direct that I want to put that in the right direction. I don't want to see it go in the ways that I see in the U.S., like some of the, again, problems that you have in the U.S. as far as other alternatives or motives behind things, alternative motives behind things that take away from this purity that we were talking about before. For me, I know early on, I hated going to races. I did not go to races. Looking back, there were the few races I went to. I don't know why I went there. Because for me, running on trails is the only thing that made sense in that phase of my life, 2015, about putting my head in a waterfall. It was like the only thing that made sense in a point in my life where I needed something like that. And it was something so pure. When the few races I went to, I was just like, this is a lot of spandex, and I didn't like it. It didn't hit me right. But then I realized 2 things a couple of years ago was like, one, whether or not I wanted to be my voice in the running community, trail running community, it has authority and I'm not using it. And I wanted to see, I want to see more people having that same experience that I was having 2015, still have to this day on the trails, this pureness on the trail. I want to see more people have that. And I see right now where Brazil is with sport, a big entry point for people to discover that we have trails in Brazil, that people have this in their backyard. Because I'm not sure if Odin is probably not a good example, but a lot of people in Brazil don't realize the incredible vastness of nature that we have here. And they're discovering that now. And one key way that they're discovering that is through races. So as much as I hated races a couple of years ago, I now see them as like, well, this is a way to bring the community together and make sure that the conversation is right. Not that I'm going to control the conversation, but I want to give people that alternative. I want people from different backgrounds who show up at these races be like, hey, I don't need to talk shop. I don't need to talk about equipment the whole time. I don't need to talk pace, stats. There's this pure love of nature that we can share together. So I'd love to get tips from you as your doc and Marty McFly, looking back at Scott Jurek here. I'd love to get tips from you about what we can do in Brazil to protect this purity that you saw, to protect this love of nature that you saw, and that seems to be unfiltered, in your opinion. What kind of advice could you give us?
No, I mean, firstly, I just want to say, like, my impression is that you're doing amazing work, and I feel like having the podcast, having your platform, and just from afar following, it seems like you're doing really cool stuff. And so I think it was interesting for me to hear your story right there, and I appreciate you sharing. Because I do think, especially if it's true what you're saying about how you're back in the 2008 or whatever, it's like you can help shape and craft the vision and the scene, which is like, that's incredible. So kudos to you for doing what you're doing. I think that's amazing. But as far as like advice, I feel like what's cool is it seems like that grassroots communal sort of vibe is so strong, right? It seems like it's so strong in Brazil. So finding a way to just not let that die. And I think ways that dies in the US, or how it did die in the US, is like the whole lottery system, like, and all the hoops and barriers that it takes to get into a race. So like, oh, you want to run the Hard Rock 100, you got to do all these races, you got to put your name into a hat. Like, it might take 20 years to get into the race. And it's like, I don't want to go, like, it's so much effort to go do that race, and so that creates a certain community and a certain vibe around that. There's good things and there's bad things. So if there's a way for like these popular races in Brazil to stay open and like allow people from all walks of life, you can keep the costs low and not have to go to a big lottery system. Like, I feel like that could be one opportunity to sort of keep it open for everyone, and that could just get people coming back to the race. Whereas there is that barrier, the lottery systems in the US, where so many people are into it that now they have to like cut down on how many people do it, because there's like such a demand for these people doing the races. And I think because of that, it's spurred off like the FKTs and like doing different objectives in the mountains that are like non-race based, is people looking to do something different outside of the rigid race format. So I feel like that kind of thing is the biggest for me. I mean, it would be cool to see in 10 years from now if like some of the biggest races in Brazil, if they're still kind of more open. I don't know, like, do you guys have lotteries for some of the bigger races now, or what's that like?
No. We have a few races they reach a saturation point where it's like, because of the where they are, they enter into parks. Yep. They have a cutoff. But it hasn't reached the point where they've implemented a lottery